that you have to go out and arrest your primary rival in order to stop him and keep him from getting on the ballot, and do things that are just like, honestly, this is just like a naked assault on him, right? Like,
Right.
we're taking away your college degree, bro. Like, your A's are no longer A's, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? For all intents and purposes, this is just a naked power grab, and it shows how weak the current Turkish government is. I wouldn't say weak. I would say desperate.
Desperate, yeah.
Right? Desperate's probably a better word, because the writing on the wall is that they were going to walk into next year's political elections and they were going to get routed.
Islam will continue to be triumphant until there have been 12 Khulafa, all of them from Al-Quraysh.
The God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever.
This is my brother, my executor, and my successor among you, so listen to him and obey.
My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting.
Whoso obeys me obeys God. Whoever disobeys me disobeys God. Whoever disobeys my commander disobeys me.
The Lord said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession.
Two systems of government, two visions for life on earth. Whichever is true changes everything. This is Christ and Khulafa.
Welcome back to Christ and Caliphate. On this show, we talk about current political events in the Muslim world, and we also talk about timeless biblical principles. Today, we are going to be catching up on the situation in Turkey, which is something we have covered extensively in previous episodes. So what's going on in Turkey right now?
Well, the president of Turkey oversaw an effort to have his chief political rival, the mayor of Istanbul, whose last, I can't remember his first name, but his last name is İmamoğlu, removed from his office. He had him arrested on corruption charges and conspiracy to commit terrorism. It even got so like deep that the college that he went to revoked his. I think it's great. It's so funny. The college revoked his bachelor's degree, because in the Turkish constitution, in order to be president, you have to have graduated from a Turkish university. So, as you can see, this is a kind of all-out assault on the president's chief political rival.
And this isn't a hypothetical chief political rival, right? My understanding is İmamoğlu has been selected as the main opposition candidate for the next Turkish election against Erdogan. And when is that?
Next year.
Next year, okay.
Yeah.
So the next presidential election is next year, and the guy who's already selected as the chief rival has been jailed, stripped from his job as mayor of Istanbul.
Yep.
And his university degree has been revoked.
Yes, and the entire city has been placed into a conservatorship by, the Turkish national government. So that means, whatever apparatus he had in place, as far as followers and supporters, people he appointed to posts within the government, they've all been removed as well, and are probably under investigation.
So if we look back at Turkey for the last few years, a lot of people feel like it's becoming a dictatorship. And we have this struggle between Ataturk's vision of Turkey.
Right.
And Ataturk was the sort of creator of modern Turkey after the First World War.
The founder of the Turkish Republic, yeah.
Which is a mostly sort of secular movement, like very explicitly secular, secular nationalist movement, versus Erdogan's vision, which is a much more conservative Muslim, harkening back to the days of the Ottoman Empire, where Turkey was the world superpower.
Right.
And would it be fair to say that up until this point, Turkey actually has been a democracy?
Yes and no. I mean, there has been a lot of corruption, honestly, that has gone back for decades. So in some instances, it's a democracy in the fact that the election results have been honored, but there's also widespread electoral fraud, right? And, there's a lot of evidence that's posted to that for the past, I don't know, like 4 or 5 election cycles, right? Including presidential cycles where, not the last presidential election, but the president election before that, there was a lot of allegations of ballot stuffing and stuff like that, and the one before that. But there's no investigations because Erdogan's grip on power is so strong that he's able to, kind of get rid of anyone who wants to launch those investigations and look kind of into it. So, yeah, in the sense that there are elections, and in the sense that some of those election results matter, yes. But also there is a lot of corruptions coming from the top.
So,
but this is the worst. This is like, just to be clear, this is the worst thing that I have seen in my lifetime outside of military coups.
Okay. So this is so because this is the worst thing. To you, does this seem like a sign of the strength of the current government, or is it the weakness of the current government?
Well, I don't know if you recall a couple of years ago that there was a coup, and it was the military elements of the military tried to overthrow the president, and that showed you how strong he was actually at that time. He resisted the coup and pretty much used it to get rid of all of his opposition. So regardless of, whether or not he engineered the coup, which a lot of people think he did, and used it, for his own political ends, that showed you how strong he is. The government is definitely weaker than it has ever been. They lost in the country's like general election last year. It wasn't for president, but a lot of opposition gained seats, including the mayor of Istanbul, right? So that Istanbul would fall into the hands of the CHP, the opposition party, CHP, is unheard of, right? The it's pretty much always hard and fast rule that the next prime minister of Turkey is the mayor of Istanbul. It's the largest province. It's the most influential province. It's got the most money. It's got the most infrastructure. That person is usually most qualified to run the country. And a lot of people won't remember this because it's been a long time, but Erdogan was formerly the mayor of Istanbul before he became the prime minister. That being said, that you have to go out and arrest your primary rival in order to stop him and keep him from getting on the ballot, and do things that are just like, honestly, this is just like a naked assault on him, right? Like, right. We're taking away your college degree, bro. Like, your A's are no longer A's, right? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like it's just such an extreme and radical and honestly desperate step, right? That goes beyond just, let's drum up charges on him or whatever. I know people in Turkey, and I have, I guess, my sources that I pay attention to. And for all intents and purposes, the charges are, but from people who I know that know him, like have interacted with him, know him and have seen him. The two things I would add is, first of all, he seems to be a very genuine person. And second of all, that the charges are fake, right?
It is the mayor of the Istanbul.
Yeah.
Who, people who know him.
Yeah. So I know people who know him, and I know people who have interacted with him, and I know Christians who have interacted with him, and they are appalled by this because it's false. There's no like history of this, right? Who knows? Maybe somewhere in the background he ran he masterminded some money laundering ring or something like that, whatever he's accused of. But for all intents and purposes, this is just a naked power grab, and it shows how weak the current Turkish government is. I wouldn't say weak. I would say desperate.
Desperate. Yep.
Right? Desperate's probably a better word, because the writing on the wall is that they were going to walk into next year's elections, and it was going to be like a rout. They were going to get routed, and this is their attempt to, desperate attempt to keep that from happening.
Yep. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out from here. What's the reaction in Turkey been like?
I mean, there are thousands and thousands of people protesting all over the country. There's a lot going on in Istanbul. Mayors from different cities have banned protests. There is a federal ban on protests now. I guess federal is the best word, but the Americans won't understand that word. Ban on protests, yet people are protesting en masse, and it's still going on, right? So they have not managed to get people to go indoors and stop.
So this is encouraging, because Turkey is not Iran, right? It's not like there's a potential this could actually still go somewhere. But what is the path out of the woods here? Is there one?
The only way that this government will ever be viewed with any kind of legitimacy and honestly legacy is to restore this man and have an actual election. That's it. There's only one path forward for legitimacy. Otherwise, you have taken what was probably a authoritarian government running a trend that would trend towards authoritarian, soft dictatorship. But, you can't come back from this, right? Once you start rounding up all of your political opponents and just making up charges and throwing them in jail and everything else like that, you're ignoring the will of the people. And in order to keep power, then you have to have a dictatorship. So it's really hard to walk back from this moment. The path forward is an honest election. Hopefully, I mean, I don't love the UN, but some kind of outside, observers or something like that. But I honestly think that this does not end with the president of Istanbul being released before the election. So I think that this goes on. I think that Erdogan uses it to keep power, and I think that the country slips closer and closer to harder dictatorship.
Right. So basically, if he hangs on to power, he loses legitimacy.
Yep.
And if he hangs on to legitimacy, he loses power.
Right. And it's crazy because for all of his faults, there are some good things that he's done for Turkey. I mean, he's made it a relevant player in the Middle East, regardless of whether or not you like his methods or not. I don't approve of his methods, but Turkey is part of the international conversation, particularly when it comes to the war in Russia and between Russia and Ukraine. He's in a position where he can insert himself into those conversations and use it to make himself relevant. And honestly, from a political standpoint, bro, that's your legacy. Just hang your hat on it, right? Take your chances at the ballot box. The party, I don't think, is completely unpopular. I think that he's the one making it unpopular because he's determined to sit there until he dies, until he have power until he dies. So, it's kind of befuddling to me, but you have to look at a whole lot of other aspects of, narcissist political people, right?
AKA political people.
Yeah.
And I think if he actually stepped down from power, 10, 15 years from now, there'd be old people in Turkey being like, oh, I remember when Erdogan was president, everything was amazing.
Right.
And people would forget the bad, and then his party would come back into power at some point.
I mean, I think what people don't realize is the best forms of leadership are leadership that raise up others. And it can be used positively or negatively, right? So when you have a guy like him who is the only way that the country can be run properly is if I'm running it, right? For 10 years, 15 years, you could have had You could have added a, like there's always the rule of two, right? You Sith and apprentice, or something like that, in the background to prolong your legacy, because that's really what these guys are all. In the end, that's what they care about, right? They care about how history and time will view them after they're dead. And I think this totally just destroys any good thing that he's done, right? Because there is a very strong chance that maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, that Turkey winds up in a civil war, right? Like the problem also is that Gulen is dead. So I feel like this is an attempt to get another boogeyman.
Mm-hmm.
Right, when the political forces coalesce around another primary political rival, you have to find this other guy and turn him into a boogeyman. Whereas with Gulen and Gulenists and some of the other things associated with it, maybe you could look at them and say they were more of a political threat to national security and some of the other things. I don't buy any of it, but I'm not going to say it's not possible either. But in this particular case, there's no evidence that this man was a threat to Turkish sovereignty or Turkish democracy. He was a threat to the power base, right?
Right.
Right.
And this is the thing. The longer you're in power, the more you become convinced that your project is the same thing as the national interest.
Sure.
You kind of become convinced of that. So anybody who might dethrone your power base is suddenly a threat to the country, because in your mind you are the country.
And listen, that's not just politics. That's in I've seen it in churches, I've seen it in businesses, I've seen it in households, right? Like my success is my guaranteed success is the guaranteed success of everyone in this home or everyone in this church or whatever. And that's just narcissism. It's really it's sad, but it is a reality.
This actually makes me think about King Saul in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because at the beginning of his reign, he was unequivocally good for Israel.
Right.
But the time came when his time passed.
Right.
When God anointed another.
Yes.
And he wouldn't let go of his own pride, power, and position.
Right.
Which is not what he even wanted at the beginning. Contrast that with David. David actually anoints his successor while he's still alive.
Yep.
Solomon didn't become king when David died. Solomon became king while David was alive.
Right.
And I think that's a really important thing to realize. In Torah, in Deuteronomy, it says that a king must read the law of God all the days of his life, that his head may not be lifted up above his brothers.
Right.
And if you're any man who's in any position of power, you should always be thinking about who's going to replace you when you die. But even better, while you're still alive.
Right.
Handing responsibilities, handing leadership to the next generation as soon as you possibly can is really important, because you're just a man. You're not God. You're not going to live forever. You cannot sustain the world on your shoulders.
There's a book that I like to give when I was, more discipling young men, was a book called A Tale of Three Kings by Gene Edwards. It's like this thick, right? Like it's literally that thick, and you'll get through it in, I don't know, like 2 hours. But the truth is, the book talks about like that dynamic, right? Like how does Saul handle what's going on? How does David handle what's going on? How does Solomon handle what's going on? Right? Like how I'm sorry, Jonathan. Is it Jonathan? I think it's Jonathan. And it all talks about how David's response in these things is brokenness, right? Like brokenness is the way forward for a leader, like a leader who acts in brokenness, which is really just like your meekness and your humility dictating your actions, but you're still strong, right? Like you're dealing from a position of strength. And the sad part is you look at a lot of the political spectrum. Brokenness is abandoned. Humility is an afterthought, right? And now, in order to keep power, you have to foment a political base to the point of violence. Like, look at what's happening here in the States, right? Like, the keying of Teslas was begat by riots, the BLM riots, which was begat by Occupy Wall Street, which was begat by, you know what I mean? Like, it goes all the way back to the 70s, you know, and the 60s, and right, like, it just, this political theme is definitely not in tune with love your neighbor, and it's definitely not in tune with the idea of biblical service, right? Particularly for people with like influence and authority.
Right. And this kind of comes down to worldview. So Erdogan's worldview is taking a specific version of Sunni Islam, which sees the ideal of human authority as Muhammad himself.
Sure.
And Muhammad is the ultimate political leader, the ultimate religious leader, the ultimate military leader. He's the 3-in-1. He represents everything. And Erdogan is aspiring to be that kind of leader.
I would go a step further. And I think that if he was able to, there's no way he'd be able to, he would take that position himself. It's like, oh, look at me, I'm, you know, Muhammad's right-handed man. Or in any instance he could, you know, me and Muhammad are the same, at least, right? Like, to put yourself on that kind of a pedestal.
Right. Or, you know, I am the 100-year Islamic reformer sent to guide the nation, right? Which is why the resentment against Fethullah Gulen.
Right.
If Fethullah Gulen is the once in every 100-year person, then Erdogan cannot be.
Right.
So, again, I'm not trying to blame this entirely on Islam, because obviously this is a pride issue. Every human anywhere can fall into that. But it's a very convenient excuse to think of it in those terms. And it's exactly what Jesus pushes back against. Jesus says, whoever wants to become the greatest of you must become the servant of all.
Right.
And that's what we see consistently throughout the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, even in Jesus's leadership, like what he does is he ascends to heaven after his resurrection, and he delegates authority.
Right.
He actually delights God to share his power and authority with others.
Right.
Even though he doesn't need to. He likes to deputize people. He likes to give all of his children a share in his rule and his power.
Right.
And that's completely opposite to the way of the world.
Right. I mean, it's funny because, you know, as Christians, we are, like, by faith guaranteed an inheritance with God, right? So that means we're prophets, priests, and kings. And I don't think that's like, I don't take that verse to be like, you are either a prophet or a priest or a king. You are all three of those things when you have the power of the living God living inside of you. Right? You're capable of all three of those offices. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be a king. It doesn't mean that you're going to prophesy, and it doesn't mean that you're going to, you know, perform like pastoral duties or anything like that. It's part of your inheritance. It's part of the authority that's been given to you on earth by God in heaven through faith in Jesus. So, you know, it's a much different view on power. It's a much different view on authority and the lengths to which you will, you know, attempt to keep your authority, right? You know, if you look at what David did, I mean, going back to your David story, if you're look at what David did, you know, David ran from Absalom and he said, perhaps God has removed me. Right? Perhaps God is dealing with me. Perhaps God has said, it's not my time anymore. And he puts up with cursing and people, you know, cursing his name. There's one dude who follows him along on a donkey and just like berates him in front of Shimei, right? Like just screaming at him, you know, the entire time, and other people saying all kinds of things about him. And, you know, this isn't like David ascending to the throne. This is David on the throne, leaving the throne. But it's because of that is why God puts him back on the throne, right?
Yes. So I think anybody who's watching this and thinks that Erdogan is some sort of representation of God, this kind of behavior is not the behavior of somebody who's an actual representative of God, who God is with. This is somebody overcompensating for the absence of God's presence and power in their lives. That's why they need to hang on to it at all costs.
Yeah. And again, you know, it's a cautionary tale for all leaders everywhere.
Well, guys, thank you for listening to Christ and Caliphate. We will be back next time.